So the question we're trying to answer today is, do past Jim Crow laws impact USA's current African American population? Now, the reason this is important is that while we used to be incredibly racist in our society due to these Jim Crow laws and due to the way our government set up our society, we still are inherently racist even though these laws have so apparently disappeared. So we gotta look really at how these laws impact us today and how these laws impact our society today to answer the question, how has racism impacted our society today? So our idea is that past Jim Crow laws have impacted today's United States black population negatively. Now, when you're looking at the way Jim Crow laws have impacted today's black population, the first thing you've got to look at is the origins of ideas in today's American population. Well, children who grew up under Jim Crow grew up in an incredibly racist environment where the vicious and untrue stereotype of white racial supremacy was dominant throughout society. Now, while this is a vicious and untrue stereotype, it doesn't seem like it has much of a point today until you realize that the Jim Crow generation is the one raising the current generations that live today. So, what you're looking at here is the Jim Crow generation passing on the ideas of segregation, the ideas of racial divide, and the ideas of differences in race to our generation, which caused the inherent racism in our society. Now, and that's not the only thing that's passed on. Another thing that's passed on through generations is housing discrimination. Now, under Jim Crow, African American and whites were forced to live in separated communities for housing, and this was called separate but equal. The idea of separate but equal is that you could separate people and it'd be fine because if they were equal, they wouldn't want what the other one had. The issue is this law allowed for white people to build better housing than black people, and therefore African Americans would not be treated as equals because their housing wasn't equals. Now, the issue with today is these housings are still intact. So why? Now, the answer to that first is found in real estate. African Americans are purposefully driven away by white neighborhoods by realtors. In a study shown by the HD, this was found because realtors believe that there's this vicious stereotype that African American people bring down value of wealthy white neighborhoods. So when you're looking at the way they're taken away from these white neighborhoods by realtors and shown to these more African American neighborhoods, which due to Jim Crow laws and limited economic opportunity in these areas, blacks are trapped in the housing that they were trapped in under Jim Crow laws. Now, due to the idea that they're trapped in these negative neighborhoods, they're also discriminated in by the police. Now, the idea that they, being the African American population, are trapped in negative areas does not seem very connected to police discrimination until you think of one thing. Police in the workforce are paid in dollars by the amount that they arrest. So, many times, because police, like every American, need to bring home a paycheck and need to provide for themselves and many times their families, they will enter a rule, and as they were divided by Jim Crow in economic opportunity and in standing, normally African American neighborhoods, they'll enter these negative neighborhoods, they'll go in, they'll arrest people for small or petty crimes, and because they need a raise and they need money. So that's one reason that police distrust happens. But another reason is the conflict between African Americans and police historically. During Jim Crow, race riots occurred because unfair laws had to be enforced by police because that was their job. But obviously, African Americans didn't like these laws because they were horrible to them. So, this led to race riots and fighting between the two police and the African Americans, and there wasn't anything that either side could necessarily do about them. The race riots just occurred. So this led to a lot of distrust between modern-day police and modern-day African Americans, which leads to more African Americans fighting police, which leads to more African Americans incarcerated. Now, this doesn't seem like a big deal. I mean, Sure, they get incarcerated, but so do white people. So what's the point? Well, 2,300 African Americans are arrested per 100,000 African American people. Well, only 450 white people per 100,000 people are arrested. Now, this idea of police discrimination and the stereotype that that perpetuates due to this, that all African Americans are criminal, lead to job discrimination. Now, Jim Crow laws allowed these signs that said help wanted, whites only, or more commonly just whites only. And this led it to jobs that only allowed white people to be hired. Now that those signs are down, you've got to ask, why are less African American people still being hired? Well, and the answer to this is in the racist stereotype that many job employers all believe, and that is that all African American people are convicts. Now, while this isn't true, it's perpetuated through police discrimination and negative news stereotypes across the board, almost constantly. And so, if you look down over here, in white major cities, people with white-sounding names were 50% more likely to get a job than people with black or African-American sounding names when they had the same credentials. These aren't in small areas or areas we consider traditionally racist. These were studies done in major cities such as Chicago, Boston. These are areas we do not think of as racist, but they inherently are. So now we've got to look at racism in the job community, because even though those help wanted white only signs of the Jim Crow era have gone down, they've been almost raised up in a ghost form by the idea of convict and police discrimination. Now, this leads to a difference in poverty level. Because African Americans cannot find a job, they have a lot higher poverty rates. Now, this is perpetuated in the idea that 27.4% of African Americans are impoverished, while only 9.9% of whites are impoverished. Now, you might be looking at this and think, oh, well, that could be just an error. Well, if you look at all the reasons above, it's clearly not an error. There's clear discrimination against African Americans, leading to them being more impoverished than many white people. And furthermore, 25.7% of U.S. African Americans are on food stamps. Food stamps are an institution by many grocery stores that allow people to get many times worse or less healthy food for stamps that they get for purchasing at that store continuously. So they have to live on these food stamps, and therefore this less or worse food, because of the past Jim Crow laws influencing them currently. So past Jim Crow discrimination is now continued by differing economic statuses, because we look at the way our different socioeconomic statuses are divided in today's economy and today's United States world, and it's almost a racial divide. You look at the worst part of the inner city in a city, and you look at the best part of the inner city, and you will see a clear racial difference. Now, the thing that the police discrimination, job discrimination, and difference in poverty levels all come together to create is the crime cycle. Now, this crime cycle perpetuates in a person being jailed for a small crime, leaving jail, but because of that little box that they have to check on a job application saying, yes, I have committed a felony, they cannot find a job. So they need money. So they go and commit a crime to get money. But then they have an altercation with the police because they had to commit a crime to get money. They're then jailed again, released from jail, and the cycle continues. Now, the crime cycle allows for more discriminatory laws. When you think about the way that convicts are treated in this nation, they are actually worth less than the rest of us, and they are deprived of basic American rights. Former criminals are not allowed to vote. Now, this does seem like a very logical idea. This has actually been an idea that's been in our society for a very, very long time. The issue, though, now is that due to police discrimination, this leads to many African Americans not being able to vote because they've committed a small crime and been caught for it. Now, furthermore, another law is created that that to prove people aren't criminals, voter ID is required. Now, this again seems like a logical idea on the surface. It is something that has been widely endorsed across the nation. The issue is over 100,000 African Americans have been kept from voting because of these laws. So we've gone from an idea where they previously couldn't vote because of Jim Crow laws, and now they just can't vote because of other laws. They can't vote because of other things that have been put in place by our government. So now I think we've pretty clearly discussed how past Jim Crow laws have impacted today's current U.S. population. But what is the point? I mean, yes, we can think about all this, but unless we do something with it, we're not going to change the inherent racism in our society. The idea that we would like to pass on to everybody watching this video is that we cannot change discrimination in the past, but we can change the laws. We can change the way we view each other. We can change our stereotypes. We can change the way things are passed on from generation to generation, to person. We cannot change discrimination in the past, but we can create racial equality for the future. Thank you.